There's a lot of noise competing for our attention every day. Opinions, pressure, distractions. Welcome to Hear Me on This, Clarity in the Noise. I am Dr. Hooper. Well, welcome to another episode of Hear Me on This, Clarity in the Noise. You know, in life, we all will experience times of grief. Now, grief isn't what we typically think of. When we hear grief, we think of people dying and we're grieving over that. But grief hits us in a number of ways. And so today we want to just address when loss grounds you and finding hope in the valley of grief, I should say. So hear me on this. There's a powerful parallel between preparing for a flight and preparing for life's journey. At the airport, baggage handlers carefully screen our luggage, removing unauthorized items that could prevent the plane from taking off. But the aircraft can only carry so much weight. Overload it and it won't get off the ground. Our lives work the same way. We all want to soar. We all want to accomplish great things, to live abundant lives, the lives that God promises. But sometimes we find ourselves unable to get off the ground, weighed down by baggage we never were meant to carry. And among the heaviest bags we drag through life, just from one season to the next, is one we rarely talk about openly, and that's grief. Grief is a misunderstood weight. When we hear the word grief, most of us immediately think of death, as I mentioned a few moments ago. We picture funerals, black clothing, tears, but grief encompasses so much more than that. Grief is the emotional suffering that's brought on by any significant loss. It could be bereavement, mishap, disaster, a life-altering change. Let's say you had a relationship end, you lost a job, or a number of other things can happen that can cause you to grieve. There's an ancient story of Job that illustrates this beautifully and painfully. In a single day, Job lost his livestock. Now, I hope none of us have a day like Job had. He lost his livestock, his servants, and all 10 of his children. Yes, all 10. Messengers arrived one after another, each bringing worse news than the last. The Sabaeans raided his oxen and donkeys. Fire fell from heaven, consumed his sheep. The Chaldeans stole his camels. A great wind collapsed the house where his children were gathered, killing them all. Job's response? He tore his robe, shaved his head, fell to the ground, and worshiped. Tearing your robe in that time of history was a sign of mourning. Even in his devastation, he declared, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." What a response. What a response to such a devastating time in his life. Now, the scripture tells us that in all of this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. Think about that. In all that he just encountered, Job did not sin or charge God with any wrongdoing. I wonder, how about you? If you encountered a day like Job had, what kind of response would you have? So there's 4 truths that we need to embrace about grief. First of all, grief is natural. It's not a sign of weakness or lack of faith. Even Jesus wept at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. When we experience loss, tears are appropriate, normal, and healthy. We shouldn't let anyone shame us for mourning or tell us not to cry. The only way to experience loss is to have had something or someone valuable in our lives in the first place. So, yes, scripture tells us who are believers that we are not to grieve as those who have no hope in 1 Thessalonians 4:13. But that doesn't mean believers don't grieve at all. The difference is that we grieve with the presence of God, with the assurance of his promises, and with the hope for restoration. Secondly, grief is expected. We would be naive to think we'll never experience loss in this life. While we can't prepare for when or how it will come, we can be confident that God's grace will be sufficient to strengthen us through it. Job certainly never expected the cascade of tragedies that befell him, but his story shows us how to navigate seasons of grief with faith intact. Hear that. How to navigate seasons of grief with faith intact. Don't turn your back on God. Don't give up on your faith. Don't stop believing, but faith can remain intact. Number 3, grief is a reaction. Sometimes we don't even recognize our grief for what it is. The mother watching her child board the bus for the first time experiences a form of grief. It's the loss of a season, the end of total dependency. The parent at a graduation ceremony feels it too. These are milder forms than what Job faced, but they're real nonetheless. Grief is the part we feel inside. Mourning is the outward expression that others can see. And then fourthly, grief is the result of loss. And loss comes in many forms. The death of a loved one, a move across the country, the end of a relationship, job loss, financial collapse, health decline, broken trust, shattered dreams. Anytime we perceive any kind of loss, we will experience some measure of grief. Let me say that again, because I think, as I said earlier, grief is one of those things that we've been led to believe is something we only experience when there's a death. But anytime we perceive loss of any kind, we will experience some measure of grief. Now, there's some dangerous myths out there. There's too many harmful myths around grief in Christian circles. First of all, grief is a sign of weak faith. Nothing could be further from the truth. Real Christians don't mourn. That's ridiculous. You should be over it by now. I mean, have you ever had anybody tell you that? You've been grieving over something and, people will tell you, well, you should be over it by now. Well, who are people to tell you how long that you're supposed to grieve over something? Or they'll say, if you really love God, you just trust him and move on. Now, these statements aren't just unhelpful, they're unbiblical. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 2-4 tells us it's actually better to go to a house of mourning than a house of feasting, because sorrow can lead to wisdom and a happy heart. Grief has a purpose. It's passageway from one form of life to another, a journey that must be traveled. So there's 5 powerful responses to loss. And these 5 responses are very beneficial and will be very helpful to you when you do perceive any kind of loss. Number 1, go ahead and grieve. Don't pretend, don't perform, don't push it down. Jesus said in Matthew 5:4, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Grieving is not a lack of faith, it's a pathway to healing. Walking through the dark valley is necessary to emerge on the other side. Number 2, recognize the sovereignty of God. Again, these are 5 powerful responses to loss. Even when we don't understand, we can trust the God who sees the end from the beginning. Job eventually declared, I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. In Job 42:2. God's sovereignty doesn't mean he causes every tragedy, but it does mean he rules over all reality and can work all things together for good. Number 3, invoke the presence of God through worship. Notice the first thing Job did after mourning was worship. He tore his robe. Yes, that's a sign of mourning, but then he worshiped. He didn't complain. He didn't accuse God. God, why'd you do this? God, why didn't you stop this? God, why'd you let this happen? No, he didn't accuse God. He didn't demand answers. He worshiped. Worship doesn't deny the pain. It declares that God is still worthy in the pain. Hebrews 4:16 invites us to draw near with confidence to the throne of grace so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Here's number 4. Expect victory over grief. Yes, expect victory over grief. You will not be in a perpetual season of grief over any form of loss. There will be a point where victory can be proclaimed. In Job 19:25, even in his darkest hour, with his body wasting away, Job proclaimed, I know that my Redeemer lives. He expected vindication. He expected restoration, and he received it. And here's number 5 of the 5 powerful responses to loss. Focus on the future God has for you. You see, grief is a season, not a sentence. God's promise remains. Jeremiah 29:11 says, I know the plans I have for you, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. You know, there's a story of a master violin maker whose workshop was destroyed by fire. Among the ruins, he found one charred violin, cracked wood, melted strings, scorched varnish. Most would have discarded it, but the master took it home and spent months carefully restoring it. When he finally played it, people were amazed. It produced an even richer, deeper sound than before. Why? Because it had been through the fire and restored by the hands of the master. You see, scripture promises in Psalm 30:5, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And this, after you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. And that's 1 Peter 5:10. You see, God doesn't discard you because you've been broken by grief. He is the master restorer. And sometimes it's after the grief that he produces something more beautiful in you than before. Deeper worship, stronger faith, greater compassion. Job lost everything, but God restored double. Not just possessions, but peace, purpose, perspective. And the same God who restored Job is faithful to restore you. Grief is not your stopping point. It's the beginning of another leg along life's journey, one that leads to restoration and renewed purpose in the hands of a loving, sovereign God. Well, I hope this podcast today has blessed your life, has been beneficial to you. Even if you're grieving right now, I want you to know that if you take this and apply it to your life, you're going to experience that restoration. You're going to experience that victory, and you're going to be better than even before when it's all said and done. I'm Dr. Hooper, and this is Hear Me on This, Clarity in the Noise. Thanks for listening to Hear Me on This. If today's conversation brought clarity, take it with you and share it with someone who could use it. Until next time, this is Dr. Hooper. Stay grounded, stay thoughtful, and keep listening for what really matters.